This is the Sony 20-70 f4G lens, and this is the Tamron 17-50 f4 lens. What's the difference between these two? And if you're looking for a, $1,000, less than $1,000 lens for kind of walk around vlogging all-in-one lenses, which one of these should you buy? On paper, they're pretty similar. Obviously, one has a little wider, one goes a little longer on the telephoto end, but they're both an f4 lens, constant throughout the zoom range. And they're both, frankly, a really great walk-around vlogging lens. But one of them might be a lot better for you. So let's test these out and see what they're capable of. Okay, this is at 20. $50. 70. All right, now switch the lens. Whoops, not that one. I got so many freaking lens caps in my pockets right now. Nice, got some ice crystals on the lens. That'll be helpful for later when I have to clean them up in post. All right, it's essentially the same spot. Let's see, 17 and 50. Very nice. Okay. So next I want to do some video clips and show you the difference between 17 millimeters and 20 millimeters, because that's, and then a 50 and the compression you get between 50 and 70 millimeters too on the long ends of the lenses, because it is actually pretty stark, a pretty dramatic difference. All right, here we go. So this is what 17 millimeters looks like. I'll have to mark my spot here in a sec. And here's 50 millimeters. So you can see this is all at 5.6. So one thing about the difference between 17 and 20 is you think it's only 3 millimeters, but it actually is a pretty big difference when you get on that wide end. And of course, you're gaining 20 millimeters on the long end with the Sony, which makes a very large difference when you're getting a little bit more of that compressed background look, the longer lens look. All right, where was I? I think it was right here, right? Yeah. So this is 20 millimeters, 50 millimeters. Oh boy. And here's 70 millimeters. Now, just so you know, that was all in 8K with just the standard stabilization, which means just the mechanical stabilization built into the camera, because you obviously get the full field of view when you do it that way on the Sony cameras. If you switch to active stabilization, you get a fair amount of crop. So I filmed those in 8K with no extra crop, so you could see the full entire field of view of each of those lenses. But there is something that's not much discussed. My buddy Chris Brockhurst has mentioned it a couple of times, but you do actually get better active stabilization when you're using native Sony lenses. So next, let's try a handheld walking shot with the Sony lens, and then we'll do as close to the same exact shot as we can with the Tamron lens, and see how those different looks work out with stabilization. So this is handheld 20 millimeters standard stabilization, which is just the IBIS. Now we're gonna switch to the active stabilization. So this is 20 millimeters with active stabilization on the Sony 20-70 here. Now we're on the Tamron in standard stabilization, just handheld walking at 17 millimeters, which does make a bit of a difference. Here's the Tamron at 20, standard stabilization. Now we'll switch to active. So here is the Tamron at 17 millimeters, active stabilization on the A1. Here is the Tamron at 20 millimeters on active stabilization again. Makes quite a difference. Now, in the stabilization, this is where I do see a pretty large difference. The Sony, because it communicates better with the camera, or it's programmed into the firmware of the camera or something, Sony is able to calculate how to change or adjust the active stabilization based on the focal length of the lens, where it just doesn't perform quite the same as a third-party lens like the Tamron or the Sigma or anything like that. Which is interesting because you would think the focal lengths are the same and it's communicating the focal length with the camera, but there's something about the way Sony has calculated the active stabilization with Sony lenses that it just knows a little bit more about the lens, about the image characteristics, whatever it might be, that it can get that calculation that much better and give you a much smoother, much more stable shot than a non-native Sony lens. So another thing not talked much about, non-native Sony glass. I mean, we talk about it, but in practice, how much does it work out? I'm using the A1, so it should be able to shoot up to 30 frames a second in high-speed burst mode. Question is, how does it actually work when I'm using the Tamron versus when I'm using the Sony? Let's find out. Okay, here we go. All right, now we're on the Sony. And that will be where you'll see the most difference, especially if you're shooting on something with high burst frame rates like the A1 or the A9 Mark II or Mark III. A non-Sony lens may not be able to focus as quickly as the camera can, and you'll see a difference when you're shooting moving subjects. I keep hoping for a moving subject, and so far there aren't any. All right, we're moving on. It's too dang cold to sit here and do anything, so we're gonna go see about maybe a different location, see if we can find something that's a little more pleasant, at least a little out of the wind. And on the plus side, it will let us get warmed up by getting some blood moving. Hey, if you're enjoying this video or getting value out of it, then consider subscribing. My focus is helping solo creators like myself make good decisions when it comes to buying new gear, and then also get the most out of it by giving you tips and tutorials on how to use it and maximize it. It was an extremely cold day, but it was a beautiful day to take photos. But let's look at some of the differences between the two photos. There actually weren't as much as I thought. So I've got the Tamron, this is the Sony 20mm here. Pull that up and look at some of the sharpness. This is the Tamron. There we go. And again, this is on the A1, so 50 megapixel stills. I mean, if you're not gonna see sharpness, but they're very, very close. Like, I see the Sony has a little bit more contrast and maybe a tiny bit more sharpness. Look at the sun stars, the sun flares. Honestly, here, I kind of like the Tamron sun stars a little bit better, personally, but that's, it's just, I think that's pretty subjective. Oh, this is gonna be hard to match up. Let's go right there. So, I mean, they're very close. I do think the Sony has a slight edge on sharpness over and a little bit better contrast, but they're extremely close. For two f4 lenses, they're doing extremely well. So beyond that, there are some other differences you need to be aware of. One is the fact that Tamron, this is an internal zooming lens. So the outside of the lens doesn't change at all. It is, well, weather sealed. It's got a nice little weather sealing on the back. And then it has a focus hold button or a programmable button and the ability to upgrade and change the lens function via USB-C. Other than that, it's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Now the Sony, on the other hand, has a click ring for aperture clicking on or off. It has the aperture ring, which is pretty nice. You can manually set your aperture to what you want it to be. And then of course it has autofocus, manual focus switch, and focus hold buttons on the side and the top. But if you're gonna do a lot of gimbal work, this lens does have an extending barrel. So from 20 to 70, you can see it extends a fair ways. And that might make a big difference for you if you do a lot of gimbal work. And that's one of the reasons I actually really like the Tamron 17 to 50 for gimbal work, is it gives you just a nice zoom range, but it doesn't change the weight on the gimbal enough to have to rebalance or anything. Now when it comes to weight,
the Tamron is 458 grams, so pretty lightweight, and the Sony is 489 grams. And then of course there's the size differences. The Tamron's a little narrower and a little longer. The Tamron has a 67 millimeter filter thread, where the Sony has a 72 millimeter filter thread. But again, if you're going to zoom the Sony out at 70 millimeters, that makes it quite a bit longer and doesn't really necessarily change the length of the Tamron doesn't really necessarily change. It doesn't change because it's internal zooming. And then of course we come down to what is arguably probably the biggest determining factor for most people, and that's price. The Tamron comes in at $699, whereas the Sony comes in at $1,099. So a $400 price difference. So if you're very budget conscious, then the Tamron is definitely going to be the lens for you. The performance is excellent, but I'd love to know what you think. Which one of these lenses is better? Were you surprised by how they performed compared to each other? Let me know in the comments below. Next, you're going to want to watch this video over here, which covers some great budget lenses for Sony. I'll see you over there. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below, or join my live stream, which happens most Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern, where we can have a little bit more of a conversation, maybe get to questions I didn't answer in this video. I'll see you again soon in the next one. Cheers.